This is an example of a project page on Makerble, and the way that it works is for a given project, you've got these 5 different lists of metrics, and the reason for that is because this is a way to help a project think about its strategy in terms of, if we take this as a real example, this is a project that's using football to help children improve their skills, like their teamwork, their confidence and stuff like that. And so the things that the project might be doing is they'll be running activities, like they'll be running training sessions. So they could have a goal on metric for number of sessions held, and this will show the number of football training sessions that they've held. And it's saying that the target is 20 and they've actually held 50. Then they might also want to be tracking what we call engagement. So it's like, yes, we've held 50 training sessions, but did anyone actually attend those training sessions? So one of the metrics that they've got in the engagement column is attendees. So that's like saying, this is how many people have attended the training sessions. And then the next thing might be, okay, so people have been attending the training sessions, but have they improved their confidence? And so one of the metrics might be to do with confidence at this level. And then the next stage might be, okay, well, people are improving their confidence, but are they more committed to sports? And so that's why we've got this next level. And then at the end, it might be they're more committed to sports, but are they more happy as a result? And so we've got these metrics at this level. So we have, for every project, we've got these 5, we call them stages of metrics that exist. And every kind of metric that is created on Makerble that we call a goal is attached to one of those 5 stages. So in the admin panel, you'll see that there are these 5 stages called activity outputs all the way through to long-term outcomes. But in the front end, we sometimes call it something different. So that's why we've got this thing called the label, which is why it says for activity outputs, we actually now call them activity metrics. Participation outputs, we now call them engagement goals. So which is why when you look at it on the project page, it says the label title rather than the stage title. But those are the 5 stages. So that's kind of the way it works on the system. And in terms of how this is created, behind the scenes on every project, we've got this strategy option or theory of change. So if a user is a project editor or a charity editor, then they can edit this. So they can decide basically, what is the strategy for my project? What are the goals that we want to track for this particular project? And when they do that, it takes a while to load, but they can essentially design the strategy for that project. They can decide what goals are going to go in there from each of those different stages. And so the way it works is they can just, when it comes to the activity metrics or participation or the engagement goals, if you go back to the admin panel, if I select activity metrics here, then it's going to give me, it's going to take ages, but it's going to give me a list of all of the goals on Makerble that have been added to the activity metrics stage. And in the most part, a metric can only be related to one stage. So you've got all of these, which are metrics that are added to that one, to the activity stage. And so which is why when you're here in choose from library, it will give me a list here of all of the potential activity goals. So these are all of the goals which are already added in Makerble, which exist in that first stage. So these are the things that you're allowed to add to the first stage. So you can either look in here and just use this choose from library option, and it will first of all show you your metrics. So these are any goals that you've created. Then it will have your organization metrics, which is these are any goals that your organization or charity has created, but which are in the activity column. And then these are any public metrics that have been created. that are in the activity column or the activity stage. So when you're creating a new goal, for example here, so this, I got to this from the create goal page. Then if I create a new goal here, what the system is doing, I could call it anything, like I could call it tennis sessions held, for example. Then what the system is doing is when it creates this goal, it is saving it within this stage. It's saving it within the activity output stage. And that's why this, like tennis sessions held, if we were to create it, would be available within this first list. Whereas when it comes to engagement goals, when I go to choose from library for this, what it should do is only enable me to choose goals which are from the participation goal section. So if I created a goal using this tab of participation goal, then the system will add that goal in the other stage, this one, participation outputs. And so that's kind of how the system differentiates between those two different types. And when you go to the Explore Goals page, so you can get to there by, at the bottom of the site, go to Discover and then select Goals. What this is saying is these are all of the goals that have been created in those 5 lists, but these are ones which are publicly available that anyone can add to their project. So again, it's those 5 stages. These are all of the activity metrics. These are all of the engagement metrics. Sometimes the terminology changes, and that's because the developer that implemented this didn't use the stage label, but instead hard-coded the title, which causes a problem because sometimes the titles are out of date. But this one, what they've called mind metrics here, relates to what we've got here as short-term outcomes. This one of behavior metrics, is all of the outcomes that are medium-term goals, or behavior goals is the title it should display. And then value creation metrics are all of the ones which are the long-term outcomes. So what this is doing is enabling the user either from here, like from the Explore page, they can select, I want to add, for example, this activity metric, I want to add it to one of my projects. And if they choose one of their projects, like Mixed Netball, then what it's doing is it's adding that goal. Okay, there's an error. I don't know why there's an error. But assuming there wasn't an error, it would be adding that goal to the activity metrics column on that project. And it's the same for any of these. So if I add a behavior metric, if I just click show all, then it will now show me all of the behavior metrics that are on the system. So if I you just have to keep loading more. But if I clicked add outcome, then it would give me a pop-up and let me choose which of my projects do I want to add this goal to. And again, I could select the project and then it would add it. And because this is the behavior goals, then it will add it to the behavior goals column. So that's how the two match up. Now, that's hopefully quite straightforward, but then there's another element to this which comes into it, which is when you're looking at an outcome. So just in terms of terminology, if we go back to the project page when we get there, or even we can just, I'll do it from the project page. Whenever you add new goals to a project, it takes you to the targets page in case you want to add a target for that goal, but that's not mandatory, but that's why it does that. So when you're on the project page, one of the things you might have noticed is that for the activity goals and engagement goals, I'll just click that again. For the activity goals and engagement goals, it's just got sessions held and it's got the target. Whereas for the short-term outcomes, medium-term outcomes, and long-term outcomes, so basically stages 3, 4, and 5, it's a little bit of it's a different format because it says belonging and then it's got a sub-goal beneath it, or it's got confidence and then it's got a goal beneath it, or it says children are more active and it's got 2 things beneath it. And that's because if you're familiar with the language of objectives and key results, then this will make sense to you, like OKRs. The way that charities think about it is outcomes and indicators, but just to put it simply, it's if you want these three goals are usually things that are in the project strategy, but they're quite aspirational and they're quite difficult to measure. So it's easy to measure how many sessions we held, we can just count. It's easy to measure how many attendees were there, we can just count. But if you want to measure someone's happiness, it's like, how do you measure happiness? So what we do is we enable the user to create additional sub goals, or in the database we call them indicators, that enable them to try and measure some of these difficult to measure things like happiness. And so for something like the Oxford Happiness Questionnaire, which is basically the name of an outcome called happiness, then the user can add a variety of indicators to it that enable them to measure that metric. So when you are looking at an outcome, if I just go back to the main, if I press back, it might work, then you'll see that for the activity metrics and engagement metrics, it just lists the goal. But when you're looking at the outcomes, it's the goal is like, say, church engagement, but then within that are these two indicators, and actually there's another one here. And so there's like always the outcome, but then within it are the indicators, which are the things that you actually measure. And when you're creating a new outcome, so if I'm creating an outcome here, then when you create an outcome, like for example, measuring happiness, the system will prompt you to add sub goals to that outcome of like, well, actually, how are you going to measure happiness? And so when you then go to the type head search here, it lets you search for a whole set of like a whole load of indicators that are in the system that might let you measure happiness, or whatever it is that you want to measure up here. And in terms of what those indicators are, that's what is shown here in these three tabs. So we have three types of indicator that you can use to like measure an outcome. And an outcome, just to refresh, is anything that's in stage 3, 4, and 5 is going to be an outcome that has several indicators within it. Whereas anything that's in stage 1 will just be an activity output, and anything that's in stage 2 will be a participation output. And in terms of language, we use output, metric, and goal kind of interchangeably. So the first type, and let's go with happiness. So one way of measuring happiness could be with like a tick box, or what we call like a binary indicator. So we could have for like happiness, we could have an option, and actually I'll do it from here because it's actually might even make a bit more sense. So I'll put in happiness, and rather than choosing an existing indicator that already exists, I'm going to click create new sub goal. And what this is letting me do is create a new indicator. So let's say for happiness, if I wanted to go with like something that was a tick box, I could just have like, are you happy? Yes or no, basically. And if we add that, then it would create a field which is just like, are you happy? Yes or no. And when we were tagging beneficiaries and stories, then we could tag them to that indicator of just like yes or no. Or I could use like a multiple choice question with a set of levels. So it could be like, how happy are you? Or a better question might be, let's go with that. High, medium, low. So we've got like 3 options. When you go, and you could add more options if you want, and you could also define it by adding a description. So you could say high means I am smiling most of the time, and low might be I rarely smile, for example. This is like the multiple choice option, which in our system we call a scale indicator, because it's like a scale of options, and for each beneficiary, when you're tagging them in a story, you choose which part of the scale they're in. Or you could go with what we call a numerical option, which is something you can count. So again, to measure happiness, if you were going with a numerical option, you could ask a question like, how many times do you laugh each day? That might be the way that you're measuring happiness numerically. And so the unit wouldn't be millimeters. That kind of question wouldn't have a unit. So you could select no units, and then you can save that sub goal. And so what I'm illustrating here is that for every outcome, you can add multiple indicators of each of these three types. Binary and rather what this page does is it lets you create the outcome and the indicator on the same page. But alternatively, you could just like go to the tab and create a binary indicator by itself, or you could create a multiple choice indicator by itself, or you could create a numerical or value indicator by itself by doing it from here. But essentially, that's how you create outcomes. And whenever you're looking at a project needs to have, whenever there's an outcome in a project, there needs to be indicators that relate to it. So if you were to then like create a story, which is then how this really comes to life, like it's like, okay, we've got these goals, how do we actually measure it? How do we add the data? If I just click the complete survey button, then it's going to show all of the story categories, or rather surveys, that have been added to this project. But if I just click the name of the project, it will take me directly to a page where it will show me all of the goals that have been added to that project. Now, it's showing some of the goals that have been added. This first one it's saying is football practice sessions, which is, I know that that's a participation output, and the way that it displays a participation output is as a tick box, because what it's saying is like, who is it that attend? This should actually say attendees of football practice sessions, because it's letting me say who attended. So I'm like, Abigail attended, and Andrew attended. And as you can see, this is increasing for each person that I select. So the system is recording there are 3 people who attended football practice sessions. I'll scroll down to a different example. Well, actually, this actually isn't a helpful example. Let me go back. I don't know why it didn't give me the full list of options. I'll go to the mixed netball one instead. Let's try it from here. So using football to teach life skills, hopefully this will have a better set of metrics to choose from. So again, fundraising participants recruited, that is a engagement metric, which is why it lets me select which beneficiaries this relates to. So who were the 3 people who were recruited? Andrew, Carol, and Caroline. Let's see if we've got a different kind of metric to show you. This now is a scale in, so actually no, then this one here, this is an activity metric. So it's saying activities done, because we must have a metric on there called activities done. So if it was recording something like, how many workshops did you run? How many, let's just stay with how many workshops did you run, or how many training sessions did you run? Then that's just a number. Because it's an activity metric, you can't tag beneficiaries in it. It's just the number of how many activities did you do. When it's a scale indicator, so that's where we had the multiple choice options, then the way that it displays it is it's like it displays each beneficiary, but now it displays each of the options that we had in the multiple choice selection, and the system calls these a sub ratio. And so what I can say is, for the question of I am not particularly optimistic about the future, when I spoke with Andrew, he strongly disagreed with that. He does feel optimistic about the future. When I spoke with Carol, she strongly agreed that she doesn't feel optimistic about the future. So I can say where each of these people are on this scale. And there's actually, I know that these ones are all related to happiness. And the reason why we have maybe multiple indicators related to happiness is because researchers, like psychologists, have done studies where they're like, actually, if you really want to measure someone's happiness, the way to do it isn't to say, are you happy or not? You need to ask these particular questions. Are they optimistic about the future? do they find most things amusing? And so you kind of have to rank each person in your project, the different beneficiaries, against each of these questions. So this is how you use like a scale indicator. I'm really hoping that there's an example of a great. And then this is an example of a value indicator. So when it's a value indicator, as we said in our example, if the question was how many times do you laugh each day, then that's what it would say here. How many times do you laugh each day? And then for each beneficiary, what we're inputting here is the number. So it's like, well, they laugh 450 times each day. And then here it says the unit that was selected. This is just a demo, which is why it says AAA value. But to make this feel relevant to this unit, it might instead say, how many miles did you run today? And so it might be that for Andrew, he ran 4 miles today. For Carol, she ran 7 miles today. Caroline ran 0 miles today. George ran 2 miles today. And so the value indicator is really versatile because you can change the unit that you're using. It means that you can use Makerble almost like Fitbit in a sense to like manually log how far people have run, for example, if you wanted to do it for that. And so, yeah, there's more scale indicators on this particular project form. I won't go through all of them. I just wanted to illustrate how the different types of indicator and different types of metric appear on the create story form, which is what this is. And then when you've created the story, the system then displays a kind of mini report of the information that you logged. So at the start, we'd logged that there were 3 fundraising participants, and they were Carol, Andrew, and Caroline. We answered the question of activities done. We said that there were 8. We answered that I am not particularly optimistic about the future. And we said that for Harry, he was moderately disagree. George was slightly agree. So this is like a scale indicator. This is an activity metric. This is a participation metric. And then here is a numerical value metric or value indicator, and it's displaying the numbers that were recorded for each of these beneficiaries. And if we were to go, you can click summary and it just kind of displays it slightly differently. It lets you select each metric up here. Each metric has an icon, and it will just give you a summary of what was recorded for that individual metric if you want. Or you can do it the other way and look at each beneficiary that was tagged in the story and be like, okay, so for Harry, what's the information that was recorded? The pop-up isn't displaying, but it should expand and show the information that was recorded for that beneficiary. But if we were to click on Harry now, it will then take us to Harry's beneficiary page, and that story that we've just created, it should display it in the timeline with the information that was recorded for Harry. Because of performance, it looks like that story hasn't yet appeared on his timeline, but eventually it will. And just in summary, if we now go back to using football to teach life skills to children, the project, then those progress bars that we previously had, all of them should now be updated based on the information of this latest story. The story has appeared in the timeline here. So it appears in the project timeline before it appears on the individual beneficiary timelines. But here it is. I'm signed in as Yale Young, and here's it saying there are 3 fundraising participants. And if I click expand story, it will give me that miniature report of the story that we were looking at on the story show page. And this information that was recorded, if I go to the all-time view rather than the period view, then it will cause each of these progress bars to update. Now, because this is recorded in a video, we could go back and see whether the progress bar has updated. But I'm so I can't remember what the number was for this before, but it should have increased. What did we have? We had activities done 8. So that should be down here. If we check the video, we'll probably see that was at whatever, like this was at 5 before, and now it's at 13 because we've added 8. And so each of these should have increased by whatever's happened. When it comes to a scale indicator, the way that we represent the progress is slightly different. So if you can see on the mouse over, what it displays is from the most recent story that was logged, what is the distribution of beneficiaries across each of the sub ratios. So for the question of I am intensely interested in other people, then if I do mouse over it saying in your last, based on the most recent stories, 3 of the beneficiaries were at strongly agree, 4 of them were at agree, and 3 of them were at undecided. And so it's giving you a summary of like where each of the beneficiaries are on the scale indicators that you're using. And it's scale indicators that our clients really find useful because, yeah, if you're trying to understand psychology or where people are, then you need to ask these really specific questions that have got a very accurate scale, and then you can see how people's responses to those questions has changed over time. And that's one of the main benefits of Makerble and things that attract people to it. Because imagine that you're working with children and you want to see how is their performance changing over time in terms of their confidence or their behavior or any other things like that, then you can use the scale indicators to see how things change over time. And then when you, with all that the progress board does is the progress board just lets you take one or more of the individual goals that are on the project page, and it just lets you add those into, so like all of these goals that are going to be appearing here. When we've got a progress board, all we've done is just like chosen to display that individual goal as a card, which just looks a lot more interesting. And then you can just see the information here instead, and you can like click this button to see the history. But I hope that gives like an overview of like the different kinds of metric that we have on Makerble. Like there's the activity and participation ones, and then we've got these 3 other stages which always contain outcomes, and the outcomes always contain indicators, and there can be 3 types of indicator: binary, scale, and numerical value.
Yes.
Any questions?
But actually, it's a very big thing we are doing on over here. So I need to check one more time your video.
Sure.